It's another edition of Time About the Movies. We're looking at the second weekend of February 1991. That is February 8th. And we got four movies to look at today. And we're going to start off with the top grossing film of the weekend. The movie that finally knocked Home Alone off of its long pedestal at the number one spot that had been held for the last 12 weeks. It's Julia Roberts in the psychological thriller Sleeping with the Enemy. So yeah, I had to cut that trailer because the first part of it was nothing but the song Brown Eyed Girl, and then that's why it abruptly started back into the thriller aspect of that trailer, because it starts off with the song Brown Eyed Girl with the voice of Don LaFontaine talking about Julia Roberts' character. But you don't want to hear about those specifics. You want to hear my thoughts on the movie. Well, some notable things about this movie. Not only did it beat Home Alone, it finally knocked that movie off the 12-week reign at the top spot of the box office, but it was also the record breaker for the highest domestic opening for a film with a female lead, which surpassed Alien, the original Alien, back in 1979, which only had $10 million. So that was a record that was held for like 12 years, and then this movie comes along and does it. But then again, that's kind of expected. Julia Roberts was pretty much one of the biggest rising stars at the time. I mean, she was just in Pretty Woman the year before. She did Flatliners that summer, and then she does this movie, and it actually grosses $100 million domestically when it was all said and done. So it was one of the big unexpected hits of the year that year in 1991. Unfortunately, the movie itself doesn't really work. I mean, it doesn't use how do I put this? It doesn't really use Julia Roberts to her full potential. I mean, this is a movie where she's supposed to be playing this woman who fakes her death, changes her look, moves on to a different life, and her husband, who thought she was dead, comes back and plans to kill her because she did this because her husband sexually, emotionally, and physically abused her throughout their 4-year marriage. So she moved on to this new town and all that, and this is Lifetime. This really is a Lifetime TV movie, but just because it's Julia Roberts at the forefront of this, it's got to be a big theatrical release. I mean, literally nobody else in this movie has the pedigree that Roberts had at the time. I mean, Patrick Bergin may be close, but even then, that's a little bit of a stretch. There's also Kevin Anderson. Just the movie itself, I thought it just didn't work for me. I mean, it was a movie that I thought maybe Roberts could have elevated this a little bit, but she's just playing a role that any other actress would have played. I mean, the only reason they got her was because she was one of the big rising stars at the time, and it definitely shows in here. I mean, she's not really doing anything that any other actress at the time could have really done. Like, you could have put Melanie Griffith in this. You could have put somebody like maybe Bette Midler in this, because these actresses, people like her and Goldie Hawn were doing movies that were way against their types at the time, like the type of characters they were playing usually in these type of movies. But yeah, I feel like you could have gotten anybody else besides Julia Roberts in this, and it maybe wouldn't have been as big of a hit, but it probably would have been just the same overall. But yeah, pretty much this movie is just mediocre. It doesn't really use Julia Roberts to her full potential. It's a very formulaic, cliched script. You can tell what's going to happen. You can tell what the big twists are going to be. You can tell what the thriller aspects are going to be, and it's just not exciting. I mean, it didn't really work for me when I saw it, and it must have worked for everybody back then, because, like I said, it was a huge hit back then, and I just didn't see it. So that's my thoughts on Sleeping with the Enemy. Now let's move to a far superior movie, in my opinion, and that is Steve Martin's comedy L.A. Story. Another example of why the comedies of 1991 were just so special. I mean, like I said, this was a really good year for comedies, and this is one of the big examples, L.A. Story. This wonderfully smart and hilarious comedy that Martin wrote. Great cast overall, including Martin. You have Victoria Tennant, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kevin Pollak, Mary Lou Henner, John Lithgow, Richard E. Grant, Sam McMurray, Patrick Stewart. It's a fun movie. It's a really good, well-made film. It has a lot of very funny moments, and it just works to Steve Martin's greatness, the great things that make Steve Martin as great as he is as a comedian. And it's just very funny, too. It's a very funny movie. It's a very well-made film, directed by Mick Jackson. I can't recommend this movie enough. If you haven't seen L.A. Story, I highly recommend checking it out. It's definitely a movie that is well worth seeing. So, There you go. That's my quick thoughts on LA Story. Let's move on to the next movie, and that is The Neverending Story 2, The Next Chapter. I went for the TV spot because really, that box office bunny short's pretty much the only thing that most people remember from this movie, because that was easily the better thing than the actual movie itself. I mean, the short itself is very funny, even though it is very short. It's around 5 minutes, and usually the old Looney Tunes cartoons ran at about 7 or 8 minutes. But I mean, for a 5 minute short, it works fine for what it is. And like I said, it's much better than the actual movie that came with it, which is a shame too, because the Neverending Story was such a classic movie. Wolfgang Peterson directed it. It's a movie that still holds up to this day today. And Neverending Story 2 just feels like a sequel that really didn't need to exist. There was nothing really about Neverending Story 2 that made me look at it and say, I'm glad the story continued. It's just like, no, this is just an unnecessary continuation of the story with less of the magic that made the first movie so special and more convoluted plot lines that make this movie really not work whatsoever. I will give it this, though. It is at least better than what we got with the next movie that came after that, Neverending Story 3, but that's not really saying much. That's like saying, I had an analogy I was going to try to do, but then I immediately forgot about it. So why don't we just pretend that last 10 seconds never happened and just move on to the rest of this? Because bottom line, what I'm trying to say here is that Neverending Story 2 it's not a good movie. It's definitely not a good movie in terms of the first movie, but at least it's not as bad as Neverending Story 3. There is at least some effort of trying here, but yeah, overall, it just didn't work. It quickly died on. You could probably tell why. The only thing that anybody really remembers to this movie is the fact that they had the Bugs Bunny short at the beginning, and that was really the only real reason to go see this movie on a big screen, just to see that, at least in my opinion. But so yeah, let's move on from that. That's Neverending Story 2. Now on to the last movie, which is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. So this is, of course, based off of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead play, which is basically two minor characters from Hamlet, going off on their own adventure. Of course, Lion King 1.5 would use this later on as the inspiration for that direct-to-video sequel they did. And in this movie, you have Gary Oldman, you have Tim Roth, you have Richard Dreyfuss, you also have overall a great cast that includes those three plus Ian Glenn, Ian Richardson, and I don't know. It's a pretty fun movie. It's an interesting idea to have the story going on with these two minor characters expanding on their world within the world of a much bigger story, and it is a pretty funny movie. There are some good funny elements to it, and it definitely feels like the play that this is based off of. Gary Oldman and Tim Roth are very fun to watch as the two main characters. The visuals are very nice to look at. And it is like I said, it's a really fun movie. It's a good movie to watch as a good companion piece to something like Hamlet. And yeah, for the most part, it is a very enjoyable film that definitely feels like you're watching a theatrical version of what the original play was all about. So yeah, overall, it's pretty good. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. So that's another edition of Time About the Movies in the Books. Next time around, we look at the weekend of Valentine's weekend, February 14th, with 4 movies, including what would later be this year's Best Picture winner, The Silence of the Lambs. But we also have John Goodman in the comedy King Ralph, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, John Candy, and Demi Moore in the infamous comedy Nothing But Trouble, and also Iron and Silk. So those 4 movies we'll look at the next time around the next time we meet. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and as always, if you want to see more videos like this, check out the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another new episode. So thank you for watching, I'll see you guys tomorrow, and until then, take care.